welcome back to Higher Ways, where we are finally going to cover the story of Joseph. I know it seems like it's been a very long journey, and some of that has to do with how busy life got after I started this channel, but we made it, we're here, so let's get into it. Joseph is the favored son of our previous patriarch, Jacob. Jacob had 12 sons, and these would later become the 12 tribes of Israel. Israel, of course, being Jacob's other name as given to him by God after their quote-unquote wrestling match. And so we're going to pick up in Genesis chapter 37, and we're going to cover all the way to the end. Now, obviously, just like the other videos, we're not going to read the entirety of what goes on. I'm going to summarize a few sections, but there are a few things that I want to highlight. And, there are some interesting lessons that we can learn through Joseph's life, just like with all the others. So we're going to start in chapter 37, verse 2, and it says, "This is the history of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, was feeding the flock with his brothers, and the lad was with the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives. And Joseph brought a bad report of them to his father. Now Israel loved Joseph more than all his children, because he was the son of his old age. Also he made him a tunic of many colors. But when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him, and could not speak peaceably to him. Now Joseph had a dream, and he told it to his brothers, and they hated him even more. So he said to them, 'Please hear this dream which I have dreamed. There we were, binding sheaves in the field. Then behold, my sheaf arose, and also stood upright. And indeed, your sheaves stood all around, and bowed down to my sheaf. And his brothers said to him, Shall you indeed reign over us? Or shall you indeed have dominion over us?' So they hated him even more for his dreams and for his words." So we can see here that par for the course, we have some more family dysfunction. We have a brother who has 11 other brothers, most of whom can't stand him because, oh, look, here's daddy's little favorite boy. And, his dad even kind of made it worse by drawing attention to it and giving him this bright and shiny, colorful coat, which would have been very expensive to make back then. And so not only is he, obviously the favorite, he's being doted upon. It says that he gave a bad report of his brothers to his father. So in other words, when they were out supposed to be doing their jobs, Joseph went to check on them, and he ratted them out, and he's like, they're not doing a good job. So, of course, they don't like him very much. And because of that, we see what happens to Joseph very early on in his story. If we jump down to verse 12, let's continue reading. "Then his brothers went to feed their father's flock in Shechem. And Israel," meaning Jacob, "said to Joseph, Are not your brothers feeding the flock in Shechem? Come, I will send you to them." So he said to him, "Here I am." Then he said to him, "Please go and see if it is well with your brothers and well with the flocks, and bring back word to me." So he sent him out of the valley of Hebron, and he went to Shechem. Now a certain man found him, and there he was, wandering in the field. And the man asked him, saying, "What are you seeking?" So he said, "I am seeking my brothers. Please tell me where they are feeding their flocks." And the man said, "They have departed from here, for I heard them say, 'Let us go to Dothan.'" So Joseph went after his brothers, and found them in Dothan. Now when they saw him afar off, even before he came near them, they conspired against him to kill him. Then they said to one another, "Look, this dreamer is coming. Come therefore, let us now kill him and cast him into some pit, and we shall say, 'Some wild beast has devoured him.' We shall see what will become of his dreams." But Reuben heard it. Reuben is the eldest brother. And he heard it, and he delivered him out of their hands, and said, "Let us not kill him." And Reuben said to them, "Shed no blood, but cast him into this pit which is in the wilderness, and do not lay a hand on him, that he might deliver him out of their hands and bring him back to his father." So it came to pass, when Joseph had come to his brothers, that they stripped Joseph of his tunic, the tunic of many colors that was on him. Then they took him and cast him into a pit, and the pit was empty, there was no water in it. And they sat down to eat a meal. Then they lifted their eyes and looked, and there was a company of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead with their camels, bearing spices, balm, and myrrh, on their way to carry them down to Egypt. So Judah said to his brothers, "What profit is there if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let not our hand be upon him, for he is our brother, and our flesh." And his brothers listened. Then Midianite traders passed by, so the brothers pulled Joseph up and lifted him out of the pit, and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver, and they took Joseph to Egypt. So we see a few things here. One, not all of the brothers hated Joseph equally. Okay, Reuben, the oldest, he did not want Joseph to be killed. He tried to save him. He said, here's what we'll do. We'll put him in this pit. Don't hurt him. Just put him in the pit. And it says he planned on retrieving him from the pit, bringing him back to his father. He was trying to save Joseph from the wrath of his other brothers, which is a good thing for an older brother to do, right? He's looking out for Joseph. But the other brother, Judah is the fourth oldest. And he says, I've got an idea. If we kill him and then we try to cover it up, that's going to create problems, and that doesn't really benefit us other than him being out of the way. This way, we can get him out of the way and make some money off of it, right? So let's sell him. And interestingly enough, the people they sell them to are the Ishmaelites. Now recall who Ishmael is. This is the other son of Abraham. This is the son of the Egyptian servant that Sarah had, the one that he should never have even had in the first place. So there should not have even been an Ishmaelite people to begin with. But we can see now the sins of Abraham cascading down through time and now making problems for Joseph. Now, I suppose you could argue that had there been no Ishmaelites, perhaps Joseph would have died. But I think Reuben's idea would have still stuck. After all, they threw him in the pit before they even considered selling him. So I think Reuben would have actually still saved him. But regardless, we see now Joseph has become a slave in Egypt. Now, while slavery then was not the same as slavery, in, say, American history, it was still obviously not good. You were the low man on the totem pole. You had your food, your shelter, and your clothing all provided for you, but you were not treated like a citizen. You were not, you were still treated as property. You were still, do this, do this, do this. You're not given a thank you. You just have to do as you're told. But Joseph, being, a God-fearing person, Joseph, even though he was the, quote-unquote spoiled son of his father, Joseph was not a bad person. Joseph had a high, moral standard. He had high integrity. That's why he ratted out his brothers and said they're not doing a very good job because, he took the job seriously. He says they're not watching their sheep. And we see that again, they abandoned the flocks in Shechem and they said, we're going to go hang out at Dothan. Again, not doing their job. So Joseph is perhaps among all of the brothers the most hardworking and honest. And we see that again reflected as we read further on in his story. We also see that his life takes a bit of a roller coaster, goes a lot of up and downs. So if we jump over to chapter 39, we'll see a little bit more what happens to Joseph. So chapter 39, verse 1. Now Joseph had been taken down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, captain of the guard, an Egyptian, bought him from the Ishmaelites who had taken him down there. The Lord was with Joseph, and he was a successful man, and he was in the house of his master the Egyptian. And his master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord made all he did to prosper in his hand. So Joseph found favor in his sight, and served him. Then he made him overseer of his house, and all that he had he put under his authority. So it was, from the time that he had made him overseer of his house, and all that he had, that the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake. And the blessing of the Lord was on all that he had in the house and in the field. Thus he left all he had in Joseph's hand, and he did not know what he had, except for the bread which he ate. Now Joseph was handsome in form and appearance. And it came to pass, after these things, that his master's wife cast longing eyes on Joseph. And she said, Lie with me. But he refused, and said to his master's wife, Look, my master does not know what is with me in the house, and he has committed all that he has to my hand. There is no one greater in this house than I, nor has he kept back anything from me but you, because you are his wife. How then can I do this great wickedness, and sin against God? So it was, as she spoke to Joseph day by day, that he did not heed her, to lie with her, or to be with her. But it happened, about this time, when Joseph went into the house to do his work, and none of the men of the house was inside, that she caught him by his garment, saying, Lie with me. But he left his garment in her hand, and fled and ran outside. And so it was, when she saw that he had left his garment in her hand and fled outside, that she called to the men of her house, and spoke to them, saying, See, he has brought in to us a Hebrew to mock us. He came in to me to lie with me, and I cried out with a loud voice. And it happened, when he heard that I lifted my voice and cried out, that he left his garment with me, and fled and went outside. Boy, if that's not just a swift kick in the rear end. We have a man who, 17 years old, sold as a slave, decides, you know what? Slave I might be, but I'm still going to do my job properly. I'm still going to honor God with my service. And he's promoted for it. He's promoted from slave to, you are the highest paid employee I have. Right? I mean, that's a heck of a promotion. He skipped every rank. It wasn't, are you going to go from slave to lesser slave to this? No, he went straight from the bottom to the top, right? The lowest position he could hold to the highest that he could hold in one move. So he's this massive blessing. And I'm sure Joseph is thinking, hey, all right, God's turning this around. I can make a life out of this. Yeah, that'd be great. And of course, what happens? Not very long after that, he's falsely accused of rape. I mean, that's what's happening here. She says, she's making up this story saying, she was the one coming on to him, and she's lying and saying, oh, he tried to come into me, and then I screamed when he tried to, force himself on me, and he ran away, and here's the code. And so, unfortunately, they believe the wife. They believe her. And Joseph is now thrown into prison. So he's had this very, very high peak, and now he's all the way at the bottom again. Now he's lower than slave. He's in prison. Probably, they're trying to figure out, do we kill him? What do we do with him? What do we do with this guy, Joseph? But while he's in prison, he has an interesting experience. And we see that in the next chapter. If we jump over to chapter 40, verse 1, it says, "It came to pass after these things that the butler and the baker of the king of Egypt," which is another name for Pharaoh, "offended their lord, the king of Egypt. And Pharaoh was very angry with his two officers, the chief butler and the chief baker. So he put them in custody in the house of the captain of the guard, in the prison, the place where Joseph was confined. And the captain of the guard charged Joseph with them, and he served them. So they were in custody for a while. Then the butler and the baker of the king of Egypt, who were confined in the prison, had a dream, both of them, each man's dream in one night, and each man's dream with its own interpretation. And Joseph came into them in the morning and looked at them and saw that they were sad. So he asked Pharaoh's officers, who were with him in the custody of his lord's house, saying, 'Why do you look so sad today?' And they said to him, 'We each have had a dream, and there is no interpreter of it.' So Joseph said to them, 'Do not interpretations belong to God? Tell them to me, please.' Then the chief butler told his dream to Joseph, and said to him, 'Behold, in my dream a vine was before me, and in the vine were 3 branches. It was as though it budded, its blossoms shot forth, and its clusters brought forth ripe grapes. Then Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the grapes and pressed them into Pharaoh's cup, and placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand.' And Joseph said to him, 'This is the interpretation of it. The 3 branches are 3 days. Now within 3 days Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your place. And you will put Pharaoh's cup in his hand, according to the former manner, when you were his butler. But remember me when it is well with you. And please show kindness to me, make mention of me to Pharaoh, and get me out of this house. For indeed I was stolen away from the land of the Hebrews, and also I have done nothing here that they should put me into the dungeon.' When the chief baker saw that the interpretation was good, he said to Joseph, 'I also was in my dream, and there were 3 white baskets on my head. In the uppermost basket were all kinds of baked goods for Pharaoh, and the birds ate them out of the basket on my head.' So Joseph answered and said, 'This is the interpretation of it. The 3 baskets are 3 days. Within 3 days Pharaoh will lift off your head from you and hang you on a tree, and the birds will eat your flesh from you.' Now it came to pass on the 3rd day, which was Pharaoh's birthday, that he made a feast for all his servants, and he lifted up the head of the chief butler and of the chief baker among his servants. Then he restored the chief butler to his butlership again, and he placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand. But he hanged the chief baker, as Joseph had interpreted to them. Yet the chief butler did not remember Joseph, but forgot him." So Joseph was such a stellar prisoner that when they got other prisoners, they said, "You watch over the other prisoners. You're like prisoner in chief, as it were." So it's a weird title, I suppose. But so then they have their dreams. He interprets their dreams, and he asks one thing and one thing only. He says, "Get me out of here. I don't deserve to be in jail. I didn't do anything wrong." And of course, the butler's, "Oh, sure, yeah, I'll remember you." But in his excitement and getting his job back and being spared and, getting out of prison himself and his elation, he forgets to mention Joseph to Pharaoh. And he doesn't just forget for 5 minutes, a couple of days, maybe a week or two. he forgets for 2 entire years. So Joseph wasn't just cast into prison for something he didn't do. He then had to spend 2 years in that prison, having done nothing wrong. But after those 2 years, now Pharaoh has a dream. And Pharaoh is troubled because, much like the butler and baker, he says, no one can interpret this dream for me. What does it mean? Now, Pharaoh's dream is very interesting. Pharaoh has a dream that there are 7 very fat cows, very, very healthy cows, right? So cows that you would, slaughter for their beef, or that you would get a lot of milk out of. And all of a sudden, these 7 disgusting, thin, emaciated cows that you could, as it were, count their ribs, if they were people. They're just slender and just slim down. And they eat the fat cows, but they don't get any bigger. They stay small. So Pharaoh wakes up in a panic. He says, what does that mean? I don't understand. He has another dream, similar idea. He sees these 7 beautiful heads of grain. We could think of them as a corn stalk. This is corn stalk with 7 beautiful heads of grain on it. He sees another one come up, and there's not really anything growing on it. It's crappy, if you want to put it that way. And then it consumes the good one, and it still looks like garbage. And he wakes up and he says, "This has to mean something. I've had, what does this mean? I don't understand these dreams. These are different from my normal dreams. There's got to be some meaning." And so he calls everybody in, and nobody can figure it out. And the butler says, Wait a minute. I remember now. There is a guy that can interpret dreams. I can't believe I forgot. Says there's a guy named Joseph in the prison who can interpret dreams. Pharaoh says, well, what are you doing? Go get him. What are you doing leaving him in prison for? I need that guy. So he says, bring him here. And Joseph says, I can't interpret dreams, but God can, and God works through me. So yeah, hit me with your dream. So he tells him the dream, tells him both of them actually, and Joseph says, your dreams actually mean the same thing. You have the same symbolism in both of them, 7 good and 7 bad. He said, and the dream is actually very, very simple. He says, God is actually showing you what he's about to do so that you can prepare for it. He says, you're going to have 7 really good years where you have plentiful, bountiful resources. The Nile River is going to bless the land and, water the crops well, and you're going to have more food than you know what to do with. But after that, you're going to have 7 years of famine that are so bad that there's going to be no food left anywhere, it seems like. And he's saying there's going to be this extreme, plenty and abundance. So he says, okay, here's what you should do is you should get somebody that's good at managing resources. You should put them over everything and let them stockpile, resources for the famine, essentially save up some of that good grain from the land of plenty, store it up so that you have food in this other time. And then we see another turnaround in Joseph's life. He was in prison, left to rot for 2 years, and then we see in chapter 41, verse 39, it says, Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, Inasmuch as God has shown you all this, there is no one as discerning and wise as you. You shall be over my house, and all my people shall be ruled according to your word only. In regard to let me say that again. You shall be over my house, and all my people shall be ruled according to your word. Only in regard to the throne will I be greater than you. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, See, I have set you over all the land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh took his signet ring off his hand and put it on Joseph's hand. And he clothed him in garments of fine linen and put a gold chain around his neck. And he had him ride in the second chariot which he had. And they cried out before him, Bow the knee! So he set him over all the land of Egypt. Pharaoh also said to Joseph, I am Pharaoh, and without your consent no man may lift his hand or foot in all the land of Egypt. So there's a lot of peaks and valleys in Joseph's life. Now we're getting an even higher peak. He went from slave to head of his master's house to prisoner to now head over all of Egypt. Right? So now he's really at the pinnacle. Now he's thinking, oh, okay, here's what I've been waiting for. But it's been a very, very long wait. We read this story as though, this happens relatively quickly. Sure, we've got the 2-year gap of him being in prison, but we're not really told how long everything else takes. But the Bible tells us when he was promoted to this position as head over Egypt, he was 30 years old. Now that may not sound like a big deal, but remember, when he was sold as a slave, he was 17. 2 years of his life were in prison. That means everything else that happened was over the span of 11 years. So this has been a very big chunk of his life right now. This has been, a third of his life or even closer to half if you count the 2 years in prison, was spent in Egypt, right? So he's almost more Egyptian than he is Hebrew at this point. Of course, he's still, he identifies as a Hebrew, obviously, but that's a heck of a promotion. It's a heck of going from we thought going from slave to head of Potiphar's house was a big jump. He just went from prisoner, possibly in line for death row, to I am now second in command. Pharaoh's the only person with more authority than I do. That's a big jump. And so now we're in this interesting position where Joseph says, okay, well, I'm just going to do what I told you that you should do. I'm going to have, I'm going to set the taxes up. I'm going to store up, some money some grain in the royal treasury and treasuries all across the land so that we have food during the time of Egypt. And not only does he save Egypt, but now all the surrounding countries are saying, hey, we don't have any food either. Let's go to Egypt and get food. And so we're going to get an interesting reunion here in the next chapter, in chapter 42. We start in verse 1. And it says, when Jacob saw that there was grain in Egypt, Jacob said to his sons, why do you look at one another? And he said, indeed, I have heard that there is grain in Egypt. Go down to that place and buy for us there, that we may live and not die. So Joseph's 10 brothers went down to buy grain in Egypt. But Jacob did not send Joseph's brother Benjamin with his brothers, for he said, lest some calamity befall him. See, Jacob doesn't actually know what's happened to Joseph. He just knows Joseph went missing 13 years ago. Actually, at this point, it's been longer than that, because they've already gone through the 7 years of plenty, and now they're in the years of famine. So it's been more than 20 years since he's seen Joseph. As far as he knows, Joseph is dead. He believes that, as kind of what Judah was saying before, he said, oh, we'll pretend that he was killed by something. So they didn't come back with Joseph. They just told their dad he died. He got mauled by an animal or something. Here's his coat that we took from, as proof. And so he's heartbroken, and now he has Benjamin. And an interesting note is that Joseph and Benjamin are the only 2 children of Jacob's favored wife, Rachel. And so now, with Joseph gone, he has latched on to Benjamin as the new favorite. So he says, I'm not sending Benjamin with you. Last time I sent my favorite with you, you lost him. He says, I'm not sending Benjamin with you this time. He says, the rest of you go and get it. And so they do. They go to try and buy food. And we see it interesting from Joseph's perspective. If we jump to verse 7, it says, Joseph saw his brothers and recognized them. He hasn't seen them in 20 years, but he recognized them. But he acted as a stranger to them and spoke roughly to them. Then he said to them, where do you come from? And they said, from the land of Canaan, to buy food. So Joseph recognized his brothers, but they did not recognize him. Now again, it's been over 20 years since they've seen Joseph. Right? I mean, they saw Joseph when he was still a kid. Right? He was 17. He wasn't even grown up yet. And now he's, full Egyptian garb. He's speaking roughly to them, which means he's speaking with a foreign accent. They don't even know that he speaks their language. He's speaking through an interpreter to them, essentially, trying to play off, oh, I actually am an Egyptian, because he realizes they don't know what he looks like. And so we see this interesting game where Joseph says, oh, okay, now I get to be the one in power here. They threw me in a pit and sold me to the Egyptians. Well, now I am the Egyptians, and now I have control over them. So he plays a little game with them, and he tests them. And they say, well, we're here to buy food. And he says, I don't believe you. I think you're spies. I think you're spies, and you came to check out our land so you could steal our food. And they say, no. Our father can vouch for us. He's back in Canaan. We have a brother. A brother can vouch for us back there. Send for our brother. And so he says, nope, you're spies. And they're just, they're adamant, saying, no, we're not spies. Please believe us. And he says, nope, you're all going to prison. So he puts them in prison for just a few days. Puts them in for 3 days. And then afterwards he says, okay, here's the deal. You said you have a brother. This is going to be a test of your honesty. I'm going to have you prove it. You're going to go back home, and you're going to bring your brother here. And then I'll know you were telling the truth, and you're not spies. Easy peasy. So he then gets ready to send them on their way. And it seems like a horrible thing to them, but he actually tried to do them a kindness. He's not, bitter here. He's just having a little bit of fun with them. So we see in verse 26 is where we're going to pick up. It says, so they loaded their donkeys with the grain and departed from there. But as one of them opened his sack to give his donkey feed at the encampment, he saw his money, and there it was in the mouth of his sack. So he said to his brothers, "My money has been restored, and there it is in my sack." Then their hearts failed them, and they were afraid, saying to one another, "What is this that God has done to us?" You see, Joseph, after they bought the grain, he said, "Don't tell them about it, but give them their money back. Put it in their grain sacks when you give them the grain." And so they don't know about it. Joseph is just being nice to them, essentially giving them food for free because it's his family. And they think, "Oh no, they're going to think we stole our money back, that we swiped it from the money changers. They're going to think we stole this. Why is God punishing us?" They think it's some, retribution from God for what they did to Joseph 20 years ago. They're like, "Oh no, oh, God's still mad at us." So they go back home. I mean, they've got the grain. They said, "Well, can't really do anything about it now. We got to take the grain back to our dad so he doesn't starve." So they go back. They use up all the grain. Now they're out of food again. So in chapter 43, we pick up again. Chapter 43, verse 1. Now the famine was severe in the land, and it came to pass, when they had eaten up the grain which they had brought from Egypt, that their father said to them, "Go back, buy us a little food." But Judah spoke to him, saying, "The man solemnly warned us, saying, 'You shall not see my face unless your brother is with you.' If you send our brother with us, we will go down and buy food. But if you will not send him, we will not go down. For the man said to us, 'You shall not see my face unless your brother is with you.' And Israel said, 'Why did you deal so wrongfully with me as to tell the man whether you had still another brother?' But they said, 'The man asked us pointedly about ourselves and our family, saying, Is your father still alive? Do you have any other family? Have you another brother?' And we told him according to these words. Could we possibly have known that he would say, 'Bring your brother down'?" Then Judah said to Israel his father, "Send the lad with me, and we will arise and go, that we may live and not die, both we and you and also our little ones. I myself will be surety for him. From my hand you shall require him. If I do not bring him back to you and set him before you, then let me bear the blame forever." And so here we see an interesting shift. It's been 20 some odd years. His brothers now have their own children. But we see a change in Judah. Remember, Judah was the one who initially suggested that they sell Joseph. But now he says, "Okay, listen, send Benjamin with me, and if I don't bring him back to you, I'll take the sole blame for it." Right? I'll bear the blame for it. Right? He used to say, "Oh, we hate Joseph. We're going to sell Joseph." Now he says, I'm gonna be selfless here. I will bear the blame for it. And we see how far he's willing to go as we go later into the story. But they do eventually get their father's permission to go down, and he says, "Okay, if you're gonna go down there with your brother, let's try to make this the best possible situation. I really don't want to lose my brother, so here's what you're gonna do. You're gonna bring a bribe to the guy. Here's a bunch of gifts you're gonna go down with." And so they bring the money back that came with their sacks last time, and then they bring more money to spend, right? Because they want to make things right. They want to make the accounts right because they're still afraid that they're going to get accused of stealing it. And in chapter 44, when they go to buy the food again, they said, they're honest. They come back and they say, "Look, we found our money in our sacks as we left. We don't know how it got there, but we brought it back, and we brought more money to spend to give you more business." And the guy says, "Relax. That's not from us. We don't know how the money got there. I have your money. You paid for this stuff. I remember." So they say, "Okay, okay, good." So they buy more. And now Joseph ups the ante. And in chapter 44, verse 1, he says, "And he commanded the steward of his house, saying, Fill the men's sacks with food, as much as they can carry, and put each man's money in the mouth of his sack. Also put my cup, the silver cup, in the mouth of the sack of the youngest, and his grain money." So he did according to the word that Joseph had spoken. So Joseph, he knows who the youngest is. He knows it's Benjamin. He knows that it's, his only full brother. The rest are his half-brothers, right? They're children of other women. But Benjamin is the only one that's actually from his mom. So he knows very well who Benjamin is. And of course, he recognized his other brothers. He's recognizing Benjamin. They bring him down, and he says, "Okay, we're going to up the ante. We're going to put all their money back again. But this time, we're also going to put my cup into the sack of Benjamin." Now, he does this as a bit of a test for them. They've already proven that they're honest, right? They've already, brought the money back and said, here we don't know how we got this, but this isn't our money, it's your money. They've already proven their honesty in that regard. So now he ups the ante and he says, I'm gonna give them another test. And if we look a little farther into the chapter, if we pick up in verse 9, we see that they send a I don't know what you want to call him, a warden or whoever, after the brothers, and they say, oh, somebody has made off with the master's cup. How dare you? How dare you, treat us this way? We've shown you kindness, and, you would rob us? How dare you? And, of course, the brothers are like, what are you talking about? We haven't taken anything. What, I don't understand. And so they come to this agreement. They're sure that they haven't taken anything. And so we pick up in verse 9. And this is the brothers of Joseph speaking. He says, with whomever of your servants it is found, let him die, and we also will be my lord's slaves. And he said, he being the man who is chasing them, he says, now let it also be according to your words. He with whom it is found shall be my slave, and you shall be blameless. So he says, I'm not going to go that far. I'm only going to punish the person that was involved. Then each man speedily let down his sack to the ground, and each opened his sack. So he searched. He began with the oldest, and left off with the youngest. And the cup was found in Benjamin's sack. Then they tore their clothes, and each man loaded his donkey and returned to the city. So that's a bit of cruel suspense there. I'm sure Joseph told him, he said, start with the oldest. He said, let him squirm a little bit. As the one by one, they go, oh, okay. They didn't find anything. Good. One by one. He could have started with Benjamin. I mean, he knows where the cup is. He put it there. He says, no. Start with the oldest. Let him sweat a little bit. And then they find Benjamin, and he says, well, Benjamin's got to be punished. Let's bring him back. So they haul off Benjamin. And the rest of the brothers are so distraught. They say, oh, no. It says they tear their clothes. And that's a bit of an old-timing phrase. It is very literal. They would actually, rip their garments. But it was a outward sign of frustration or being upset. And so it says they loaded their donkey and returned to the city. So in other words, they go chasing after Benjamin. They said, no, we can't let him take Benjamin. We promised our dad nothing was going to happen to him. So if we jump down, we see just how far they're willing to go, and Judah in particular is willing to go to secure Benjamin. If we jump down a few verses to verse 16, it says, then Judah said, what shall we say to my lord? What shall we speak? Or how shall we clear ourselves? God has found out the iniquity of your servants. Here we are, my lord's slaves, both we and he also with whom the cup was found. But he said, far be it from me that I should do so. The man in whose hand the cup was found, he shall be my slave. As for you, go up in peace to your father. But then we see one final plea made by Judah. If we jump down to the end of the chapter in verse 33, now therefore, please let your servant remain instead of the lad, as a slave to my lord, and let the lad go up with his brothers. For how shall I go up to my father if the lad is not with me, lest perhaps I see the evil that would come upon my father? Continuing on to chapter 45. Then Joseph could not restrain himself before all those who stood by him, and he cried out, make everyone go out from me. So no one stood with him, while Joseph made himself known to his brothers. And he wept aloud, and the Egyptians and the house of Pharaoh heard it. Then Joseph said to his brothers, I am Joseph. Does my father still live? But his brothers could not answer him, for they were dismayed in his presence. So Joseph is brought to tears by Judah's willingness to sacrifice for his brother. First he tests their honesty. He says, we're going to give them the money back and see what they do with it. So they come back the next time they want food, and they're honest. And they say, look, we don't know how we got this money. This is supposed to be in your account. Somehow it came to be ours. They're not trying to cheat anybody. So then he takes Benjamin from them to see what they'll do. And Judah, the very same person who wanted to sell Joseph, has now been changed. He's had a change of heart over the years. He has, become a more godly person. And he says, I'll do whatever you want. Just let Benjamin go. I'll be the slave. Let the rest of them go. I'll do whatever you want. You do whatever you want with me. Just let Benjamin go. And Joseph is so moved by that he makes everybody clear out, because he doesn't want to cry in front of everybody else. He also doesn't want them to see what he's about to say. But it says he wept aloud, and the Egyptians in the house of Pharaoh heard it. I mean, he was bawling. He could not take it anymore. And he says, guys, it's me. I'm your brother. I am Joseph. And they're just stunned. They're just, are you for real? Like, they didn't know what happened to him. They just haven't seen him since he was 17. They sold him and said, done. Washed our hands of him. And he says, that's me. I'm Joseph. And they can't believe it. And he says, guys, you got to stop beating yourself up for the past. He says, I know that you were trying to get rid of me. I know that you sold me to Egypt to do me harm. He says, I know that. But God has used me through that to bless not only Egypt, but to save your lives. He says, if you hadn't done that, I wouldn't be here to have saved up the grain to sell you the food so that you don't die. Right? And so he's saying, look, God was able to use the evil that you tried to do and turn it into a good thing. And so there's sort of this happy reunion that happens, and he welcomes all his brothers and forgives all of his brothers. And they all come to live in Egypt with him. He says, go get our dad, go get everybody and bring him down. He says, there's so much good land here. He says, like, I'm in charge. He says, I can give you whatever land I want, basically. And so he doesn't, of course, do that. He goes and talks to Pharaoh about his family, and Pharaoh's like, well, you're pretty awesome. Your family's probably awesome. Give them good land. Tell me, are they shepherds? And he said, yeah, they can take care of cattle. And he said, great, give them this land, have them work for me. And, I'll take like whatever the tax was on, 20%, whatever it was on their stuff. And he says, but they can have the land. It's my land, sure, but they can live on it for free and work the fields and everything. I'll just take a little percentage of it, and they can have the plenty, and they can grow and prosper and do whatever. And Joseph's like, great, awesome. So his whole family moves down there, and they're all well off. But as Joseph lives out his life, and we come to the end of his life, in chapter 50, wrapping up the story of Genesis, chapter 50, verse 22. So Joseph dwelt in Egypt, he and his father's household. And Joseph lived 110 years. Joseph saw Ephraim's children to the third generation. The children of Machir, the son of Manasseh, were also brought up on Joseph's knees. And Joseph said to his brethren, I am dying, but God will surely visit you, and bring you out of this land, to the land of which he swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. Then Joseph took an oath from the children of Israel, saying, God will surely visit you, and you shall carry up my bones from here. So Joseph died, being 110 years old, and they embalmed him, and he was put in a coffin in Egypt. And that is the end of Joseph's story. Now Joseph is a believer in God's promise, and he says, we're here in Egypt. We're not going to be in Egypt forever. Eventually God will come and show us where to go and bring us to that promised land. But there would be much suffering in between Joseph's life and the next life. Unfortunately, after Joseph passed, and after there's a new Pharaoh, after Pharaoh passed, the new Pharaoh did not know Joseph's family. And he did not think favorably of the Hebrew people, and there were a lot of things that caused problems. And namely, they were turned, all of them, sort of much like Joseph, they were made slaves. And that's where we're going to pick up the next video in the book of Exodus, the slavery of the Israelites. But for now, that is the end of the first Bible Basics series in Genesis. So, let me know what you think. If there's any questions or comments, obviously, please leave them in the comment section or send me an email at higherwaysqa@gmail.com. That's higherwaysqnas@gmail.com. And until the next video, I'll see you later.